Laurel Airica, who does this magical work, I guess, with words. It just kind of blows me away every time she does it.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to just turn it over to you, Laurel, and tell us.
Thank you. So I think the apprehension I was feeling was, where do I begin? And Dottie invited me to share a little bit about how it is I came to do what I do. So, hi. So that's where I'll start. I recall saying to my parents when I was 3 or 4, I bet I now know all the words in the English language. And my mother said, I bet you don't, and spoke a word I'd never heard before. And I said, well, what language was that? So that characterizes our relationship. And so my parents met in art school in Paris, so both very creative, but of a genre I call flatlanders. People for whom there is no dimensionality beyond the second and third. And I was likely born on a metaphysical wave, and so we didn't really have much communication. And the result, I found that they spoke a Jabberwocky, and they couldn't understand me. And so that led me to plunge deeply into the word, because there was nowhere else for me to go. And I started playing with words at the age of 3 or so. My friend Renge describes what I do as echolocution. So, and sometimes when I present, I ask how many people tried to dig a hole to China in their backyard, and many raised their hand, and then I ask how many succeeded, and a few jokesters claim to have done so. But I explain that I actually did it. The way it happened was that a delivery man came with a monaural sound system delivering to my father, and since everything is metaphoric, the fact that it was a sound system is significant for the trajectory of my life. And so he told me, this delivery person, as he was setting up the sound system, that a bat had flown out of the box when he had opened it up, and that it had flown out the window and landed in a tree in the backyard. And we lived in a little tiny desert town called Blythe, so there weren't many trees to choose from. And so I ran out and stood in front of a tree, and my memory is the expectation of seeing a bat hanging from the tree, only a baseball bat. And I mean, for all I knew, they flew as well. And so that was in my memory the first time I had any sense that words that had no seeming relationship to each other could have the same name, which I found extremely curious. And so I started to collect words and to explore these sorts of resonances, and to look at the letters of the alphabet as significant symbols. And one of the things I point out is that we describe symbols as the language of the unconscious, but we are virtually unconscious to the significance in the most prevalent set of symbols on the planet, which is the alphabet. So I don't know when I started identifying with fairies. I don't think it was in childhood. I think of it now as adult onset fairy identity. And one of the ways I understand it is, when I was learning the alphabet song, I thought elemento was a single letter of the alphabet. And did anyone else have that? And then as an adult, I realized that it's true. It's actually a word. The word is elemental. And the alphabet is elemental, and I feel very elemental because my closest relationship in this lifetime has been with the English language. It has been my fascination, it has been my life partner, and together we have made some significant discoveries. So I think because I am planning to share about my elemental being and just mentioned the alphabet, I'll share a little piece called the I that is we, and it's the AYE, that is OUI. That's how I spell it, and it starts this way. And just to point out that just as we have two I's, there's actually two I's in the alphabet. There's the lowercase I, where you have the little circle and the line, which I look upon as the mind and body detached. And there is the capital I, which is a line that stretches between heaven and earth. And I believe we have this capital potential to be such a bridge. And our presenter last month, Richard Kahn, mentioned his experience with Bucky Fuller, and I actually met Bucky Fuller at my cousin's wedding because she had dated his son before the marriage. And his son-in-law, with whom I'd been speaking beforehand, when Bucky joined us at the table, said, "Bucky, I want you to meet this great poetess." And so Bucky and I spoke, and he showed me what he had for the letter I, and I showed him what I have for the letter I. And he, anyway, we had a nice conversation, and so here's what I have for the letter I. Sometimes I feel a little like a little I, insignificant, alone, fragmented, and shy. Mind detached from body, diminished in size, the epitome of self-compromise. Other times I tower with the courage, strength, and power of the capital I that touches the sky and connects it with earth. Then my sense of self-worth is completely removed from the impulse to prove who I am by what I have, think, say, know, or do. When I'm there, I'm aware that the I that I am is the all-seeing I, and I identify with the source and the force and the course of creation without hesitation. For I know there's no distance between me and my deity. But when the resistance renews its insistence, my peace falls to pieces, all certainty ceases as ego increases its volume by 10, and I suddenly feel awfully little again. And that goes on from there. But I want to go to my, let's see, this was why I was feeling a little uncertain how to now bridge into the fairy. So let me say that, well, you need to know the word sinecure, and likely, does anyone know sinecure? So a sinecure is a well-paying position requiring little or no work. So I was a professional sinecuritologist. I grew up not knowing that I had intelligence. I had no self-esteem. I thought, well, anyway, it was pretty brutal, the kind of experiences I had, which then led me to feel very limited in the kind of jobs I could go for. And so I was at one of my many sinecures because I had numerous jobs in quick successions. My all-time record was 9 full-time permanent jobs in 1 year. And so at one of my sinecures, the people I had been working for moved out, and partners of theirs decided to reserve the suite of offices and reserve me for future use. So for a period of time, I had a full payment and little or no work. So one day, now describing a noetic experience as Richard did, one day I came to this empty suite of offices. I had my desk and a chair and my marijuana pipe in my purse. And so I sat on the floor by the window, I took a hit of grass, and in 10 minutes I saw that I'd written a poem. And this is how it goes. Do you know that I flutter with butterflies? That my heart beats like hummingbird wings? Do you know I've the kind of a natural mind that knows what the hummingbird sings? May I give you a tour of the garden? Just once through and you too will see that the Lord has just granted your pardon. You've been given permission to be. So when I recited what had appeared on my page, I said to myself, that's my grandmother fairy in the tea garden voice. It was an unknown voice to me, and I could hardly take authorship credit for that piece. And I didn't know what the garden was. And the idea of permission to be was extremely foreign to me. I could more easily relate to self-be-a-leaf than to self-belief. I really felt like a human being from the plant family, not of animal origins. So on another occasion, I was taking a walk in my neighborhood in Santa Monica, and I heard, I was born in upside down town to the king and queen of backward land. I spoke a foreign language which they had to twist to understand. The king was sowing sorrow and the queen was reaping grief. I held my dreams but lost my way, confused beyond belief. How ossified the king in patriarchal misconceptions, and how brilliant was the queen in monumental self-deceptions. And I wish that I could say that they were singular exceptions, but they were the rule, as I know you'll confirm with your reflections. It was as if I'd grown invisible by taking human form, which can lead anyone to wonder why they bothered to be born. I was perceived not as an entity with her own divine identity, but as a daughter who must be persuaded to conform. So it was only in my dreams that I could totally relax. For then I'd join my real family, on the wrong side of the tracks on which old trains of thought convey ideas that steal our minds away by heading off in one direction, at the same time, doubling back. I will give you some examples that are favorite ones of mine. The fact that praying sounds so savage, yet it also sounds divine. Or how about the way the prophet has become our bottom line? Now add worship or worship, parish or perish, and you'll soon understand why this world's so nightmarish. And I was always tripping over words, both what was said and what inferred, though I was told this was absurd, I must just follow with the herd. But I'm the very sort of fairy hooked upon addiction, very. Not deafened by one definition to another so contrary, it misleads all those unwary of its hidden commentary to make false associations through their own vocabulary, such that what we thought brought progress ends up being reactionary. Since so many of the words we use are anti-evolutionary, It's no wonder that we call our writing paper stationery. Such a word is called a pun, and looked upon as all in fun. Some say they're humor's lowest form, beneath gross bathroom jokes and porn. Well, I believe some puns reveal the way that people really feel. As the flip side of words that we so rarely hear, they're the Freudian slips of the cultural sphere. They're the inadvertent echoes of society's subconscious, where the shadow and the spirit in plain view are hidden from us. And I thought, as fairy poetess, I'd sail the sea of consciousness in search of further evidence confirming my hypothesis concerning words whose sounds express their very own antithesis, or else have meanings that appear unallied to an untrained ear. For I know, if only minimally, they impact us subliminally. So, I'm not sure how, let's see, how did it happen? I developed a theory about language. I called it psychosemantics, English in translation. And I brought my manuscript to an editor at a publishing house. And he looked at it and he said, well, this is all very consistent with semiotics and deconstructionism, which I'd never heard of. And he said, but without a PhD, you can forget it. And so I went over to UCLA right after. I had graduated UC Berkeley. I thought what that might entail, and I thought I have no interest whatever in that. So a few years later, as a student of Reverend Michael Beckwith at the Agape Church, we had to do a creative piece on what this closer walk with God means to you. So I had not written a poem at that point in about 12 years, and I was very apprehensive. And so I went to my favorite wilderness park, which is so beautifully named Charmley, in the Santa Monica Mountains. And I was all alone in these 550 acres. And I was walking on the path and I saw this enormous lizard. And so I asked permission to sit beside it, and permission was granted, and we must have sat for a half hour or more. I poured out my angst to the lizard, from whom I received the most memorable message of the various things was, quality is never the issue, authenticity is. So I thought, oh, I can do that. So I wrote a piece called First Person Singular that starts out this way. This life is like a shadow play, the flickering of night and day, through which illusions in our minds are manifest and intertwined into a web that few evade, though they see through the masquerade. When I was small, I felt so certain I could peek behind the curtain. And I was sure what would appear would be some master puppeteer who pulled the strings and wrote the dance of orchestrated happenstance. The world appeared, for all its noise, like stage sets made of tinker toys, where people played pre-scripted roles like lost and unawakened souls who hardly ever came alive, which helped the culture to survive. So that's like the first half of about 3 pages. A friend of mine invited me to recite it at an event, and a record company executive said to me afterwards, would you like to do an album of your poetry? And I didn't know what I'd write about, but I certainly accepted his invitation and patronage. And that's when I took everything I discovered about words and turned it into word magic performance art. so that I can share what I discovered, the bottom line of which is language is software. English is the leading software of the Western mind. It's filled with cultural biases akin to computer viruses that reflect an antiquated and manipulated vision of reality promulgated by the church as an instrument of mind control at a time when people had to surrender their minds if they wanted to keep their heads about them, quite literally. So, gosh, there's so many places to go. I can tell you. So I guess I'll just finish that piece, which is if we elect collectively to upgrade the English language to a higher frequency through our linguistic creativity and naturally occurring verbal eccentricities, then ultimately even clatter from our idle chatter, prattle, patter, blabber, blather, and palaver as we jabber, gab, and Babylon, will turn our glowing terms from verbal vapor, either hanging in the air or trapped on paper, into tiny bits of shiny matter as we gather, chat, and natter on and with new skill at thrilling statements that instill fulfilling imagery of higher possibilities. Will finally still the quiet riot of the wild child's manic panic through the mind, so we can flip the switch enlightening every circuit of our consciousness with the electric surge of verbiage that encourages superb and selfless services to spread from soul to soul around the globe by what is said in all the light years up ahead. And then, from the islands of silence between all that's spoken, we will listen as doors to the heartland spring open. So, with my sinecures to support me, I would wake up every morning at 4 and I wrote for a couple of hours before going to a really silly job, which is a whole other story. And so this is how my fairyography took wing. So this is my new dear friend Carol Beal, and Carol is a multi-instrumentalist and piano teacher, and we're exploring the possibility of adding her mostly improvised music to my words, which are full of rhythm. I had an uncle who was a composer and a brother who was a composer, so I think their rhythm is in my words and the imagery of the artists in the family in the language. And so one of I came from a family of pompous pontificators and officious and pompous pontificators. And one of my uncles would give, as his nieces and nephews reached mid-adolescence, would give us the world is your oyster speech. So I never found that personally to be true. I don't much care for oysters anyway. But I did write a piece in response called Meta-Whimsical Rhyme Diamonds. And so Carol and I are experimenting with how do we accent that with music. And so I think mostly I'll leave that to you. I'm not sure if I want to try to add a little bit of myself. So with my work, it's not necessary to understand every word, and many of the pieces have so many levels of meaning in each word that unless you saw it written down, you would miss it. In this case, in Meta-Whimsical Rhyme Diamonds, and first of all, I want to check in with the audience, because I have no end to the verse that I can share. But I do believe that there's an end to people's capacity to have the focus to listen to no end of verse. And so I want to know, with a little feedback, whether people might wish to have me share something else or have a question. that they'd like me to respond to, or whether you're ready to hear meta-whimsical rhyme diamonds, which is a lot of nonsense syllables that ultimately illuminate an idea.
Nonsense sounds good.
Okay.
I was wondering, did you finish your story about Michael Beckwith?
Well, I wrote that piece. I was his student for a number of years and also his editor, and love him dearly. And word magic was essentially birthed. I mean, I have been playing with words all my life, but it's like the bigger vision of how to use this, use the word for the world's recreation.
Sorry, sweetheart.
That's
I had to
it.
go back.
Oh, it's right there. No, you don't need to go up unless you wish to. So Agape and Reverend Michael, who loves playing with words also, was a big part of my sojourn. So, anything else before I do? I just want to say, and maybe you'll understand after you hear the words of meta-whimsical rhyme diamonds, is that I later learned that Shakespeare in Love's Labour's Lost had written something about taffeta phrases, silken terms precise, three-piled hyperbole, and some other lines. So here he had also used analogies to describe metaphors. So I think I'd like to let Patricia get comfortably seated. Does anyone else have any sort of question?
Can I ask about your handout?
Yes. Did you not get one?
No, I didn't know if we were going to be referring to it or what.
Oh, not necessary to, but I just put together, I have a vast array of quotes about language. It's like what I'm doing is playing with words, and so over time I had a sense of the role that wordplay can have in helping to elevate consciousness.
So regarding metaphysical...
Meta-whimsical rhyme diamonds?
Yes, that. You said you may not understand it, but it will illuminate a broader idea.
Yeah, there's an idea. You'll find that it does. And so it's just to enjoy the music of the language. And that's part of it for me, is that words I find to be such a sensuous experience. And that sometimes I can hear the sounds of the wind through the trees. There's a wonderful word my friend Renge knows, susurrus, which is a word to describe the sounds of the wind through the trees. And it has a marvelous synonym, which is susurrism, which to me sounds a bit like a zither. And there's so many words that have been lost that are so gloriously enriching. And because I did not know for the longest time that I was bright or intelligent and felt so backward and inferior, it was really, my primary education has come through wordplay. I've learned so much, both through the words that fascinate me, but also for the words I find within words. And there are so many, like people have pointed out disease as dis-ease, and history as his story, as if these are unusual examples of the language speaking back to us. But what I have found is that it does all the time. And just as people say everyone has a twin, well, just about every word has a twin as well. And so in some of the narration to my fairyography, my fairy Philomela, Nightingale is her name, she says that she felt like, because she felt like the lowest form of human, she felt more akin to homonyms than hominins, which are humans, because puns are similarly shunned as the lowest form of humor. So, and just, there's so many synchronicities just before I get to the rhyme diamonds. So I would get up very, very early and I would write. and my fairy became named Philomela, which is the literary term for the nightingale. And Philomela had appeared in my life, synchronistically, that name, many, many years before the poem. So one day, and so I was up always in the pre-dawn hours and just writing, and it would so insulate me from the living a life that was so uninteresting to me, just for survival. So one day I was looking in my thesaurus, Roget's thesaurus, for a synonym for poet, and I found a description by the poet Shelley, who described the poet as the nightingale who sits in darkness and sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet song. Mm-hmm. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen, even if it was about 150 years before I was born. In any case, I want to share, because I'm just reveling in the pleasure of language and the significance and the power we hold as speakers of the word, and the need to upgrade language. So many different streams of thought I received. So here is Metawhimsical Rhyme Diamonds, without further ado. The word is my oyster. I search them for pearls, and then string them together in lustrous swirls of light, rhythm, and rhyming sound, order, and meaning in just such a way that my poems may shimmer and sparkle as fine as a jewel designed by Cartier, joining oceans of notions in boisterous commotion. Syllables of baubles that warble and wobble, and tangles of newfangled spangles that dangle. Participles like ripples from fancy fandangos. My bangles of jingles all ring when they mingle and tingle the ears with their singular lingos. These lyrical miracles, lilting and spiritual twirl in a swirl like flamboyant flamingos. Dithyrambic iambics as opening gambits, romantic semantics and cryptic enchantments with bright, energetic electro-poetics as mystic, artistic expressions of essence. Bonanzas of stanzas emblazoned with praise and adornments are worn in rococo resplendence, while couplets, embracelets of erudite eloquence celebrate scintillating selections of elements. Through synchronous sequence of vibrant ideas, heroic, echoic, onomatopoeias plus nimble sound symbols, my whimsical hymnals with multiple facets become homonymnals in a blink with some ink. There's a fine click-clock trinket of rhapsodic poetry, gilded with filigree, chanted with charms that I pull from my memory. Aglow with this glitter of alliterative twitterings, my literate finery goes flirting and flittering to reveal twinkling inklings of subtle relations twixt the signs and the rhymes in divine incantations. These rhyming designs combine fine metaphonics, harmonic, iconic, and architectonic geometrical spells with such sound parallels. They unite with delight both the shadow and light and evoke in a stroke of word fire and smoke, diagrams of the plans that create sacred shapes through which luminous, numinous beings incarnate. For as a lunarian, fairy grammarian, met a whimsical lingophysicist and alphabetarian, I take tinctures of morphine sequestered in morphemes and cast off their spells so they ring no more bells, then mix phonemes with moonbeams in crystalline tunings to tweak how we speak till the sound's true and sweet, so each sentence begins with a tone for our syntax. And then when we commune, yes, when we commune, we're already in tune. So when you hear my words, I hope that your earrings with aerial sprinklings of fairy bell tinklings. For my ultimate mission as a logo magician is to write so you'll listen so deeply, so deeply, so deeply, you glisten. Thank you. So, where to go from here? I could continue with poetry, with verse. I just don't know, again, people's capacity.
If maybe you could stand up and
Oh,
breathe
yes.
a little bit and then sit down, the body can kind of recalibrate and
Oh,
the
good.
bandwidth gets open again.
Let's do that. Thank you. The work is not just, I'm just taking dictation from higher intelligence. I may get a word here and there or a phrase, and then I start working with it. And that can take some time. And because I have been so fascinated with words and so obsessed by them, I was willing and enjoyed playing with them. And I read once when angels first started having a resurgence in the culture, I read that Archangel Uriel is the archangel of language and culture. Mm-hmm. And so before sitting down to write, I would invoke the Archangel Uriel and invite him to participate with me, to inspire me, to co-create with me. And I would also invite in all the mystic masters of the word from this culture and others. And so this is someone once asked me in my 30s what it was I wanted to do with my writing. And before I could think, I said, I want to set the fire on the page. And so I wrote a piece called Word Fire, and it references Archangel Uriel in the piece. And I subsequently learned, I say that Uriel, well, I'll do the poem and then I'll share the interesting little synchronicity about it. It's called Word Fire. I received my education from the fine electric dots of silence, the carbonated fizz and fuzz of all that is or ever was, because the slender flower of consciousness that pushes through the concrete mind had broken through the hardened places where my heart had been confined, allowing me to feel and hear what God reveals as we draw near. Now I've grown joyous and devout by living from the inside out. And here's one insight I was told. If your heart's still heavy, it must be gold. So first, I wrote with the quills that I pulled from my heart. since the blood of our wounds forms our ink when we start. Then I pulled off the cobwebs of ancient ideas and began spinning yarns as my own panacea, and to weave empty space like the finest of lace with the echoes of word twins I placed face to face. Then I learned to catch phrases as they flowed on by in ethereal blazes that drift through the sky. I grasped patterns from Saturn and bright comet tails. Even speedier meteors stopped to regale me with glorious stories from out past the sun about how all the multitudes come from the one. Then as Jupiter's troubadour, trumpeting truth for your ears to hear years from here through the Earth's atmosphere, I gambled on Ganymede, pleaded with Pleiades, asking for fire from sidereal light to write magical poetry, fluid as Mercury, vast as the galaxy, equally bright. For I'd suffered Promethean punishment from someone godlike to me, so the price had been paid. Thus with burning desire I requested word fire and the power to place cosmic fire on the page. So Imperial Uriel raised his ethereal sword in accord with the word of the Lord, and with blessings from Allah conferred this Kabbalah of English yo habla to be my reward. So I now pen my rights till his lightning rod strikes and my words come alive, charged with infinite light in a bright flicker pattern that's set to ignite soul identity memories that reunite the divine with the mortal, aligned as its portal, so spirit can enter and bring earth to center. So that's word fire.
Wow.
Thank you. And years after I wrote it, I learned that Archangel Uriel was considered the source of the Hebrew Kabbalah. And so I have essentially, at least, created the beginnings of a Kabbalah of English. And I, let's see, what do I want to share? I made a few notes. Oh, I'll get back to that. But in terms of the fairies and my fairy identity, once in twilight sleep, I had a dream in which I was with another woman and we accidentally encountered a small colony of 3,000 fairies. And they asked to have children through us, and I said it was rather past time for that for me. And they said that was no problem. And so I, at the time, was in communication with Penelope Smith, who is one of the premier and original animal communicators. And I took classes with her. I published a couple of my pieces. I used to do a lot of intuitive readings. I worked at the Psychic Hotline, and I wrote a couple of pieces called Reading Tree Leaves that Penelope published in her Species Link. In any case, I told her about the dream with the fairies, and she said, you're being asked to be a bridge between the magic of the elemental kingdom and the human world. And for so much of my life, I felt like an exile from the nature kingdom, that I had somehow locked myself out and that I couldn't return until I had helped humans harmonize their speech with natural music of nature. And so Carol and I are going to do a piece about that called Open Heart Synchrony. And so I had a dream once where I was either reading or listening to a very advanced linguist who said once humans elevate their speaking and evolve the language, then the new beings coming onto the planet won't have to forget who they are or what they're here to do. So
there you go. Back a little. Move back to the.
So I wrote a vision of what it will be like when we elevate English. And I have a whole plan for how easily this can be done. And we're just giving you little tastes of pieces of it. But this is Open Heart Synchrony. Of how exquisite it will be when we endeavor together to create an enchanting living language of supernatural poetry that scintillates so sensually that everything around us begins to vibrate sympathetically. Our words will ring so true that our honest expressions initiate lyrical sensations that every creature can appreciate, since we are all interconnected genetically and electromagnetically. So just as bird songs, cricket choirs, and other natural voices evoke a wholesome rhythm and nourishing harmonic for the planet, our gentle elemental language, every time it is spoke, will resonate symphonically with earth and all upon it. Then, when we give our words, if they can't be broken, we shall spin gold every time they are spoken. This may sound absurd, but let no one scoff it, for when truth be told, it shall make us profit. If this vision vibrates your soul, then let go of concern for the rules for transformational English grammar that have made us all such conversational fools, virtually deafened to the defamations still hidden in the glamour of our incessant ancestral verbal clamor. Instead, dismiss whatever impediments have left you feeling anything less than totally literate, and open your heart's mind to allow the transcendental music of the new Singlish language to endow you with the true sacred spells, affirming terms, amazing phrases that can ring all our bells, lift our spirits, sing God's praises, till our whole communication with the Lord in all creation underwrites our transformation and world reconciliation. Let's set tongues wagging around the world with the possibility of sweetening up English to a true Romance language. For if our words so melt the heart, they start the milk of human kindness flowing. so that every time we speak our mind, we set another flower growing. Then I believe, before our very eyes, we human beings, like butterflies, will fully metamorphosize, and as new creatures in the sun who speak the language that's become our mother planet's mother tongue in this pivotal Aquarian millennium, we will talk our way back through the garden gate with words that help reconsecrate this hallowed ground to which we all are bound by fate. For with this potent, superconscious language that our liberated spirits speak and sing in celebration of the union of the highest being with every person incarnation, we will succeed in gaining back the deed to heaven, that will to Eden, that will allow us to pass through a door of heaven. And once our hearts have taken wing, there is no telling what the deep soul velvet of our inner beings will bring upon this plane of waking dreams. We only know that with the lyrics to the song of songs that zings throughout creation, we will regreen the meadows of our hearts with sacred psalms and incantations, and with poems so rich in spirit pollen, mercy grows where words have fallen, and all of us with faith and trust will clearly hear our own soul calling. And then do you know what we can call this place? When everybody walks and talks with the wisdom, beauty, mercy, power, and grace of a Buddha or the Christ, paradise. For our joyful noise will have made it possible for us to love and live on the frequency of a higher octave. Thank you. So I think that's enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you want to have some questions?
Sure.
Does anybody have mints?
Well, just logistically, what is that instrument?
Oh, this is called a hand pan, and another name for it is called a hong drum, and they were birthed about 10 or 15 years ago in Switzerland, and they used, the original ones were a lot fatter, about this big, with little, you've probably seen them a lot, people play them on the streets, and they have little bobs that go up. And this particular one is from Russia. It's called a Rav drum, R-A-V. And it's quite flatter, and it's got a real beautiful, I don't know what everybody can see, a real beautiful sort of Russian.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. And I had to get on a queue to wait to have it, it's handmade. It took about 7 or 8 months to order it, and they send it to you in all this styrofoam. But it's quite versatile, and it's good for accompanying people that sort of it takes us further out into the mind, into our hearts too.
That's something that occurs to me to share. When I wrote that piece, it's 3 pages long, and I kept going and going and going, and I said to myself, you are really gilding the lily here. But I couldn't stop. And many years later, I met Anne and Whitley Strieber.
What is that?
Well, somebody was unmuted. I had them just mute everybody.
Okay.
I was going to open it up so they could ask questions too, but
Sounds like somebody doesn't feel well.
Oh, so I met Anne. I I lived in Santa Monica, and I lived on Lincoln, which was 8th Street, and I met David Wilcock, who lived on 12th, and
Wow.
we became very good friends for a while. And then subsequently I met Anne and Whitley Strieber, and they gave me a copy of a book by their friend William Henry, who is a mythologist and historian, called The Language of the Birds. And I read it, and I realized in reading it that, first of all, he identifies the language of the birds as English, because it's close to angels and angelish. And I also found that my most ornate vision that I just shared is actually part of ancient mythology, that I thought I'd made it up, but I think I must have remembered it. Oh, which reminds me, just to share another little funny thing in terms of memory. I have somehow still not completed my bippity boppity boo for my wish granting fairy. And but when the first 2 stanzas came very easily, and they go with cryptic Kabbalistic tricks, I fix elixirs that equips linguistic mixtures to transfix. As fertile verbal herbalist and hypnotist of gibberish, I stir within my crucible all elements reducible to simple symbols that eclipse the prospects for apocalypse. So when I wrote that, or whatever, co-created that, I thought, prospects for apocalypse, what is that clunky idea doing in my poem? And years later, I read in a book called Healing Mantras by Ashley Farrand that in the court of Queen Elizabeth I, the wisest, most educated man was John Dee. And there was the belief at the time that music and poetry could be put together in such a way as to calm hostilities. So he was working with a cabal of French and English poets to write structured, metered verse as a secret weapon to create world peace.
Wow.
So when I read that, I thought, well, that's where the prospects for apocalypse comes, and that's probably why I thought I knew all the words in the English language when I was 3. I feel like I was probably part of that cabal. I'm very grateful to have met Carol, and we're experimenting here. So anyway, there's no end to it, and so I'll sit down, and if there are questions, happily respond.
Anyone have a question?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
Can
Victoria.
you say more? So you talk about English and elevating the frequency of it. Can you talk more about that? How do we
do it?
support that?
It's very easy, and I have it in verse. Unfortunately for all of you, I don't know that piece, but the idea is, well, normally I share what I call the secret spells of the English language, some of these really dark, heavy words that are part of our regular vocabulary, and we just do not hear the undertones of it. But the way to do it, if it's software, is to upgrade it. And I encourage people to actually to do what I did, which is ask. Like once I was walking in Palisades Park, and I said to my invisible friends, give me a new word, and I instantly received the definition of beautiful. And it is so obvious, it's beautiful. There's nothing more beautiful than our being ourself fully. And so, and then there's the word definition. We are deaf to our definitions. And so we don't hear, for the most part, people don't hear. But when you discover a word within a word, or a misleading word, like for instance, it's basically ask and ye shall receive. It's my vision is for a literary lotto where people are encouraged to open to the still small voice to come up with a new word or insight into an existing word. And in the series of quotes on words that I put, I guess I should be where people
Yeah, and
online.
they can see you,
Yeah,
right?
right. One of the quotes in the series of quotes in the program I provided everyone is from Thomas Jefferson, who was saying, "New times require new words and new meanings for old words." So it's taking command of the language, and my word magic anthem, which is on my YouTube channel, is called "Taking Command of the English Language." And it's about becoming inventive with language. It's playing with words. And so the vision of a literary lotto is for people to start asking inwardly for new words, new metaphors, new phrases, like aren't we a little tired of a needle in a haystack? And there's so many that are so out of touch with the times. I replace that with looking for or learning to distinguish the sparkle of a diamond in the glitter of the sand. And rather than break a leg, how about sprout a wing? There's so it's becoming creative and inventive, and what I would love to have is a team to work with me and people encouraged to listen inwardly and to come up with a word or phrase and send it in with $1. And those that we feel have the capacity to inspire and enrich other people, we will share widely, and the prophet who received it will profit from it and will be honored. And so people will be have an incentive to cultivate the muscle of inner listening, and word by word, phrase by phrase. One of the phrase that I use in taking command of the English language, the example is, commit random acts of kindness and acts of senseless beauty. I read that was something a woman in Sausalito wrote on a napkin in a coffee house, and it traveled the world, and it changed people's behavior. And so can you imagine if we just flood the planet? I mean, there's such a debasement of culture and language going on. We say that the word is the preeminent force of creation, and yet we shoot off our mouths. we speak with ugliness, and one a piece I included in the program is the piece I wrote last December called "Speaking Beauty," and what can happen when we get creative with language. So I don't have anything up and running yet for people to send in with $1, but just be inventive with language and share it. And so I will close with a word I invented for the pleasure that comes from giving pleasure to others. And I preface it by saying that I believe Freud was correct, that everything in life comes down to the pleasure principle. He just got stuck on the first couple of chakras. But that as we evolve, our pleasures become more refined. And I recently learned that with neuroimaging, they've discovered that altruism activates the same parts of the brain as cocaine. And so the greatest pleasure comes from giving pleasure to others. And so the word I invented for that, just for fun, is metatranssensuous supersexual parahedonism.
Expialidocious.
And the tagline is accept nothing less. So, and I point out we can be having intercourse with everyone we encounter in the sense of, like that old joke, what's a four-letter word for intercourse that ends with K? Talk, yes. So we could be having the pleasure, and right now for money, I've been supplementing my income doing demos in grocery stores, and so after I got over myself about how lowly this was, and especially at this time of life, I am having the most delightful time giving pleasure and having pleasure and giving readings. Like I did a little reading for Sue on her hands today. So pleasure is endless when the mind gets quiet, the heart opens, and we exchange in ways that lift spirits and open hearts and delight everyone. So that's metatranssensuous supersexual parahedonism, which I practice as frequently as possible. And it lifts my energy to a higher frequency, which means I'm having an impact on more people on the planet. So, thank you.
Anybody else?
Do you have resources to share? You want to talk
Oh,
about?
well, thank you for asking. On my little flyer, you'll find my website, wordmagicglobal.com. I also have a Patreon site if you feel moved to become a patron of the Art of Word Magic, but I don't think I put it on the flyer. But anyway, any further questions?
This is cynic me.
Amy, yes.
Cynic me and where our language is.
Right.
Like, and especially in the schools,
Yes.
too, and the children, and the computers.
Yes.
Where language gets lost. They don't teach cursory, which I think is,
Right.
I don't know, it seems like the English language, that was so important in England, I think. They were just sticklers, right? About their language and about writing and about, so,
Well, good. So yes, that there needs to be, I have a quote, it's not included in that, but it's by a man named William Shorrock, who is saying English is losing more words than it's gaining. You need only look at your thin thesaurus on your word processing program to see that this is true, but that ailing languages can be brought back. And he said the advent of another Shakespeare could have a positive impact. So my desire is to have a positive impact, to inspire people. I can show, like, there's just so much, just taking a word apart, like the word eyes, E-Y-E-S, there's yes in our eyes, which means we're meant to see for ourselves. And see is the Spanish word for yes. And it's and I, A-Y-E, is another word for yes. So it's like our identity is about our perception. That's what makes our identity unique, rather than an identical identity. Two words that should be.
can you imagine if your program went into the schools for the kids?
Yes.
To start playing with words?
Right. It brings, well, one of my
really.
taglines is that word magic turns youngsters into punsters and punsters into pundits.
Because they would be so cool.
Because you can't help but become wise when you play with words in this way. Well, anyway, it is endless. And anyone who has connections, who have doors they can open, I would be delighted to walk through them. In addition to doing my creative work and then doing work to bring in income, there's not a whole lot of time to, whatever support can come to help me bring this work out in the world, because it can revolutionize people's perspective on the power of the word to transform the quality of this world. Thank you. Thank you. I do have books and all sorts of things to One thing my mother did for me was to take me to ballet classes 4 times a week for about 10 years. So, so I can move with a bit of grace. And I do have books for sale, some you've never seen, and little bookmarks with a little bit of word magic on it, and articles and such that you might find interesting, and I'd be delighted to share them with you upstairs. Thank you.